brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, October 29, 2015. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Halwani inside our New York City studio. We're going 3 deep this week. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com, and that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com. All right, you may have noticed we're on a little later this week, 5 p.m. Eastern, but we're still live. Very exciting. And the reason why we delayed the show just a little bit this week was because the Nevada Athletic Commission held another one of their very exciting hearings earlier today. It just wrapped up around an hour ago. We were hoping for a resolution, at least for now, in the Wanderlei Silva case, if you will, but unfortunately, that has been delayed yet again. He was supposed to have his rehearing after they suspended him for life, gave him a lifetime ban. His lawyer took that up with the district court. The district court said that they did have jurisdiction over him. And this is a fighter, of course, who was not licensed in Nevada when he was asked to take a unannounced and random drug test. But their punishment didn't fit the crime, essentially. So he ordered a rehearing. They were supposed to have the rehearing today. However, Wanderlei's lawyer didn't have the proper paperwork, said he didn't get it in time, so they asked for a continuance. It has been delayed until further notice. So nothing really to talk about.
Complicated story, though.
Yes, nothing really to talk about regarding Wanderlei Silva, and it's a story that is going to evolve and has many layers to it because, of course, he's being sued by the UFC, defamation, right? He claimed that the UFC fixed fights, and well, he claims that he's retired as well. Will he fight again? We'll see how this all plays out. But again, I don't think there's much for us to say regarding Wanderlei Silva. We were expecting and hoping to do so, but we'll wait to talk about him at a later date. Also, Caio Magalhães was fined. He got a 6-month suspension and 40 hours of community service for spitting after his loss to Josh Saman in July. So I think we all agree that punishment sort of fits the crime. But then we got
spitting on Saman, not just spitting.
Of course, yes, of course, which is a pretty disgusting act.
Yeah.
Do you feel like he should have gotten more, by the way?
No, but I think it was. But he was glad they got something.
Okay, well, it's good to hear your voice. I'm tired of talking, but I should set up that the big ticket, if you will, the main event of today's NAC hearing, Rousimar Palhares. Finally, he has his day in front of the commission. He showed up via Skype with his longtime manager and friend, Alex Davis. And of course, the issue today was that, well, his performance and his actions against Jake Shields back on August 1st, the same night that Ronda Rousey beat Bethe Correia. The eye gouging, which wasn't really discussed, kind of surprisingly today, but more importantly, holding on to the submission a little too long once again. In the end, he gets a 2-year suspension and a fine of $40,000. Did they get it right?
We are talking about the Nevada Athletic Commission here, so getting it right and NAC are kind of, I don't think those things work. Although I will say, now I was following a lot of this on Twitter because this was not televised on the UFC Fight Pass because there wasn't a UFC fighter involved. But and following it on Twitter, it seemed as though everybody who was there and was commenting about it and telling us what was going on was saying, well, it's looking really bad for him, and he's going to get a lifetime ban. And I kept, when you're hearing lifetime ban, you think, that this was the folly of Wanderlei Silva, and even the bigger folly of Nick Diaz getting, having the idea of a lifetime ban bandied about for his POTS drug test. But in this case, it seemed like that would have been the right thing to do. And so a 2-year suspension, I was all ready if they gave him a lifetime ban to say this time they got it right. I mean, I know that for any of us to say that Nevada Commission gets something right would have been headline news. This would have been a big deal, but I was all ready for that. But 2 years, this is a guy who was injuring an opponent, this is what a lifetime ban is for. You don't give a lifetime ban to a guy, even a guy who runs away from a drug test, as Wanderlei Silva supposedly did. A guy who pops hot for weed, a lifetime ban, you would never even think about that. But a guy who does something that can injure an opponent and clearly cannot control himself, and next time he steps into the cage is going to do the exact same thing. That's what a lifetime ban is for.
I kept wondering if he was Skyping on an airplane en route to Japan where he's going to go over there and fight for a little bit. No, but it was a little strange too because I was following it along from the people who were there, and from everything that it sounded like Palhares didn't really come. He was kind of giving these crazy explanations to what I didn't know who was tapping me. Things like this, and you're thinking, wow, he's just given what happened in the Diaz one and some of the other ones, you're like, he's not representing him. He wasn't really like Sean Al-Shadi, our colleague, was saying, he wasn't really there to grovel. He wasn't like trying to ease the punishment. He wasn't doing any of that. He was just kind of making up stuff as or kind of giving his version of the lunacy that was kind of going on, and yet. They start to they're going to throw out the severe upper end punishment, and then they say 2 to 3 years, which sounds very small. They almost wonder if they got gun shy after all the pressure from what happened with this Diaz thing about loosely throwing around lifetime bans and loosely doing these things and affecting somebody's livelihood like that. If suddenly they go the other direction and they get a little wrong that way, it's just imbalanced. Because honestly, if you really look at the mile-long resume of Palhares, all the things he's done, like 4 times, basically that he's been through this type of thing. He's tested positive for testosterone. He's had a lot of different things go on. He's been in the negative spotlight quite a bit. You would have thought that might have been more in turn for a lifetime ban. Like if I'm looking at it just from stepping back, a lifetime ban, whereas Nick Diaz might have got the 2 to 3 year thing. I mean, so it's like I feel like it was all backwards. So no, I don't feel like he got enough on this thing.
What would you have given him? What would you been okay with?
Truthfully, if they had said it was a lifetime ban for him, and I mean, we've talked about Palhares so often, and just regardless if he does it, if he means to do it, if he's cheating on purpose, or if he just can't register that he's hurting people, he can't register it in a fight. One way or another, he doesn't belong in a cage. That's what it starts to come down to. He's an excellent practitioner of jiu-jitsu. We all know that. He's a compelling storyline because of some of his other antics, just sort of stopping and jumping and celebrating and things when the fight's not over, things like that. He's always had some strangeness to him. I've kind of always enjoyed him, but when when you're being blasted going into a fight, Jake Shields, John Fitch, the guys who went against him they were constantly chirping about, hey, this guy cheats. He cheats, and he's hearing it. He's answering questions about it, and yet he still does it. It's just, to me, he doesn't belong in the cage. So if they had said lifetime ban, I would have been perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, it's not so much. I mean, I know we look at these bans as a punishment for a particular fighter, but it's not really about punishment exclusively here. I mean, what is the commission there for? They're there really to protect the fighters, to make sure that the fights are on the up and up, and that all the fighters are on a level playing field. And here's a case where you've got a guy who, when he steps in there, the fighter he's going against is endangered. It's not just endangered because he's fighting Palhares. He's endangered because even when the fight ends, he's still in danger. That shouldn't be the case. So to preserve the health and safety of other fighters, Nevada should not be allowing this guy to be in the cage anymore.
They also, we go through these hearings and they go through they really want to put context behind everything, right? They ask you about everything that kind of led up to this moment. They want to know your propensities, everything that kind of happened to you. He's remembering his New Jersey, suspension after going too long. You can tell from this context that he was fired essentially from the UFC for the thing that happened with Pierce. And then he continues to do it, going to Steve Carl. And I mean, to me, you're building this context not just to be like, you know what, it hasn't really happened here, let's say 2 years. Yeah. It's crazy. You're building that context because you're putting together a pattern of behavior. And that's what's weird about it. You're like, well, you had clear evidence that this guy continues to do it regardless, and yet you still give him a relative. I mean, 2 years is a long time in a fighter's career, but that's a slap on the wrist considering what he's been doing.
Well, also, it does whatever amount of time if it had been 1 year, if it had been 3 years, whatever amount, it ends. That suspension at some point ends, and then he goes back in there. And is this a guy who is going to learn from whatever the time he's away, whatever you want to call it? Is he going to learn from that and be a different man at the end? He's not. Maybe we've seen he lost his job at the UFC. I mean, all the things that Chuck's talking about, these things all happened, and this is the same guy. I don't know that he's a bad guy. He seems, every time I hear him talk, he seems like a nice man, but something happens when he's in there where his brain shuts down. He tunnel visions into what he's doing. And he's at one point was saying that he didn't know who was tapping him. Who could possibly be hitting him in the back? I mean, it was either Shields, he's on top of, or it was Steve Mazzagatti, the referee. So I don't know that you can give a guy a suspension that has a finite period, because at the end of that finite period, he's back in there and he's going to hurt the next guy that he goes in against.
And Alex Davis has said that exact same thing. He has said that when he gets in there, when he gets in that cage, something's off. You know, there's a screw loose there. He snaps into another human being. I'll say two things, and great points. I have no problem with Davis representing Palhares and just going, all right, we're not going to have a lawyer. Because what could a lawyer in this is much different than the Nick Diaz situation, right? I mean, that there's paperwork and testing and all that. I mean, this is really him trying to defend himself. However, I think they did a pretty poor job of defending themselves. If you really wanted to sort of get on the same level as the commission, explain your background, explain what happens to you when you get in the cage, explain your intentions. I don't know if they did the best job of doing that. And at the end, if the Nick Diaz suspension didn't happen last month and we're stuck with this 5-year ban for a completely ridiculous turn of events, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with this 2-year ban.
That's true.
But that being said, why can't Nevada just say, look, we cannot in good conscience license you anymore in this state. If another commission wants to go out there and let you fight, go ahead. But here in Nevada, we're going to take a stand. We're not going to take away your livelihood. We're going to say we're not going to license you until you prove to us that you know what you're doing and you're in control of your actions and emotions in the cage. Why can't they do that? Why do they have?
A little bit too logical.
Why do they have to throw out this 2-year ban, or even talk about a lifetime ban or a 5-year ban? Why can't Nevada just take care of itself and say we're going to take a stand? But hey, if Florida wants to license you, if New Jersey wants to, let them deal with it, and we'll pay attention. We'll watch. And if you show that you can actually fight in a sportsmanlike manner, then you can come back to us. But for now, we're done with you. That, to me, was the proper punishment in this case.
Sure, that would be fine, but that's just not the way they operate. We've seen how they operate. We saw Nick Diaz come in with an attorney who was very well prepared to defend him, and look what happened. I mean, it was taken as some kind of an offense.
Where does 2 years come from? That's the thing that I can't wrap my head. If Nick got 5 years for his third strike, but there are 2 tests that don't really fly, and this guy gets 2 years for actually injuring an opponent and doing it malicious. I mean, I don't understand.
Well, because Nick didn't get 5 years for a third strike. Nick got 5 years for bringing an attorney in who doggedly defended him. Other people have come in and bowed down in front of the commission and kissed their feet and gotten very small suspensions. We even heard some of the language today. I mean, again, I was following it from afar, but even in today's hearing, we were hearing a little bit about people being remorseful as opposed to not being remorseful. That's what wins in Nevada. If you go in there and bow down to them, you're good. And this seemed like from all appearances, this hearing, they just weren't prepared at all. But they didn't come in with an attorney who was attacking the commission, which would have probably gotten a worse fine. And they just brought in, I mean, at one point they brought in John McCarthy as an expert witness who essentially ruined their case. I mean, they weren't even prepared enough. When you have, anybody would tell you, if you bring an expert witness in, you better damn well know what that guy is going to say. Otherwise, you don't want to introduce somebody who's going to, mess up your case.
Thankfully, finally, the commission brought in Steve Mazzagatti, who was the ref, who has made mistakes in the past, well documented, but he gets off scot-free. I mean, shouldn't he take some of the blame as well? He was in the wrong position. Palhares' team brought in John McCarthy. It backfired, but to sort of critique his colleague Mazzagatti, and it was worth critiquing. There's no doubt about it. We all rolled our eyes when we found out that he was going to be the ref. You could see this coming a mile away. When are they going to actually police their own officials?
Well, I
know that's sort of a rhetorical
question.
I mean,
I think Mazzagatti certainly has made mistakes throughout his career, and I think he made mistakes that night, but his mistakes were well before that submission. They were when Jake Shields was getting his eyes gouged, and he did not even. I guess he did warn him a little bit, but he did not
even bringing that up. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, because that was Mazzagatti's thing. I mean, I sort of feel like you've got to.
It all comes together though as one, right?
It does, but I feel like you've got to. You call your referee on the carpet for that. The fighter does something wrong, and the referee has to take action against it. And if the referee doesn't take action against it, if I step on your foot right now and nobody tells me not to do it and I do it again, is it my fault? No, it's because somebody didn't say to stop doing it. I don't think in this submission, again, I haven't watched that tape for a while, but it seemed to me that the submission happened so quickly that Shields was in good position, Palhares rolled him over and gets him right in it, and Mazzagatti was if he wasn't in the perfect spot, he jumped in right away and was trying to stop it. I don't blame Mazzagatti for his actions in the submission. Earlier that same fight, yes, but not during the submission.
I will say that the eye gouging, I would have really guessed that they were going to get into that a little more. I mean, just given the nature of how serious that can be and why it's been outlawed since the beginning, even in the early days of the sport. So I felt like that should have actually gotten more play. I mean, we're talking about a guy who spit on Josh Simon earlier, and he's getting 6 months. This is a guy who's blatantly cheating, and it was pretty obvious. And they sort of glossed over that detail a little bit to focus on the other thing, but it was just, you'd think that would sort of parlay into it, and I think that's another reason the 2 years just doesn't seem adequate for this,
And is it me, or does it feel like it feels incredibly, it's what's the word? They're completely off base by saying that, this hasn't happened before under our watch. So like we're going to ignore, that's actual evidence that you can bring into this that should be used in your thought process to punish this guy. He's been doing this actually, his past discretions makes this particular discretion even worse, right? If it was a one-time thing, then all right, you could say, we'll see. But to ignore all of those seems completely, it's like, what are you guys doing here? You're supposed to be the judge and jury here. You're supposed to be the fight capital of the world.
We were talking about, Nick, you were mentioning the Nick Diaz third strike thing, and you're like, well, this is, if you're looking at it in context to everything that Palhares has done, you're like, well, this is how many? What is this? Like, he's been out, like he retired the sides. He's struck out. You know what I mean? Like he's been out that long. He's done so much. Over the course of time, it's all been very telegraphed too. I mean, every single fighter pretty much has to answer questions about like, ooh, aren't you a little bit worried if you get your leg that he's going to do that? I mean, it's all very strange lead-ups to his fights because he holds these submissions too long. So, and he answers those same questions. Just given that alone, it's like, well, that recurring theme is just, it's so ongoing that you think this is like his fifth strike, sixth strike. So that context should have really mattered in this particular deliberation. They should have been like, hey, man, this guy always does this,
The word I was looking for was pompous. I mean, it's like, everything that happens outside Nevada doesn't come into play here. But in fact, this is one time, out of many, which they actually should have looked at what happened outside Nevada.
But they did. I mean, as Chuck pointed out, they did ask him if he had been...
Sure, but they also said, this hasn't happened here.
Right.
So I can assure you, like Nick Diaz, if it would have happened 3-4 times in Nevada, lifetime ban would have been, the call.
But if this was the first time that Palhares had ever done this, then a 2-year ban would be too severe. I mean, I'm not to say that that's not a harmful thing, but if let's say that your fighter,
he wouldn't even be in there.
Yeah, if there's fighter X who's in the cage with somebody, he gets him a submission, and the referee, the guy taps and he doesn't let go. The referee tries to grab him and he still doesn't let go, and then he finally, he holds it too long. You get some kind of reprimand, but when the thing happens the first time, you always give a guy another chance to. What was it that he didn't hear? Did he not notice what happened?
I don't know about that because, look at Wanderlei Silva. He never failed a drug test before, yet he gets a lifetime ban for walking away. Chael Sonnen never failed in Nevada, and he got a 2-year ban. So, we're trying to like reason with people that there is no reason.
That's the thing. We're trying to apply logic to something that's completely illogical.
Doyle said they should just bring in the Price is Right.
But the wheel, just spin the wheel,
spin the wheel, and then that's where your punishment
is. Give me 6 months. 6 months. Come on.
Should Palhares feel lucky here?
I think he should. I mean, he could fight in 2017. I think most of us probably thought, especially the way this seemed to be proceeding, that we weren't going to hear from him again, at least not on U.S. soil, So I think he should feel very fortunate. I mean, what is he? He's like 34, 35 years old, in that range. I mean, he could still feasibly come back and still have a career.
I think that he probably feels like, I would not be surprised if he feels offended, because I don't think he understands what he's doing and that he's doing something wrong. I really don't believe that. I don't think that he's not like one of these guys who's out there trying to hurt people.
Sure.
I don't believe that. I think that he just gets in there and cannot understand anything that's happening other than what he's doing. I mean, I've made this, one time we talked about his fights, and it sounded like I'm diminishing it, but I think about my daughter who's 10, when I want to get her to, she's sitting there reading, and it's time to, get dressed for bed and go do this and brush your teeth, and she doesn't. And I always think she's defying me, but it's just because she's so engrossed in what she's doing that she doesn't know that I'm even trying to get her to. I feel like Palhares that's his psyche. I feel that he doesn't understand that he's doing anything wrong. And I would not be surprised if he doesn't feel lucky, but he feels like, oh, I can't believe, how did this happen? 2 years? What did I do?
Well, he's always fielded the questions about his cheating sort of like that. Like, he's always been like, what are you talking, why? Like, that sort of thing.
I think Rousimar Palhares should send a gift basket to all 100,000 or so people who signed that petition, because I 100% believe that the backlash
agree 100%.
and the outcry from last month's hearing about Nick Diaz, they were like, ooh, but this was the wrong one to get gun-shy about, in my opinion. I would love to see...
That's why it's so interesting, right?
Exactly.
Like, you're like, what is going to happen with Palhares now? You're either going to go backwards, which they did.
Double down or relent. I would love to see influential commissions like Nevada, for once, just say, look, we don't want anything to do with you, but if you want to go out there and make a living, I just don't feel like they should be able to take away people's livelihoods all over the world. Why? Why them? Why does it come down to these 4 people?
Especially this commission. I mean, look, I think it was last week we talked a little bit about the New Jersey Commission and their little experiment with judging, and I know California's done some interesting things. There seems like there are commissions that are doing that have their head above water and are paying attention. But these guys, and the worst thing that could ever happen to them was going on Fight Pass all these times and seeing how the sausage is made.
Well, I mentioned that last time we talked about them, and I said that I felt like airing these hearings is actually counterproductive because they're developing big egos. I gotta admit, I kind of missed them today. I mean, in the sense that I couldn't hear anything on the phone, hardly. Thankfully, we had some reporters on the scene, Jeremy Botter, a few others. Good on them. They live in Las Vegas, but we couldn't watch it. Yeah. And now I actually feel like, you know what? To have this on the record, it actually helps all of us, especially when something crazy like the Nick Diaz thing happens. I will say, though, that I was disappointed in Fight Pass because, A, Wanderlei Silva was on the docket. He's a UFC fighter. I mean, he's a contracted UFC fighter. That's a pretty big deal. And if you're going to say that you're going to air, Titan and Pancrase, these are other, minor leagues, if you will, then Rousimar Palhares, who is the champion or was the champion of maybe the 3rd biggest promotion in America or North America or the world, him having his day in court, I think if you want to be that outlet, if you want to be that platform, then why wouldn't you air this? You know what I mean? I don't feel like you should pick and choose. Let's just air all the NAC hearings if there's anything MMA related.
What's his fight? They've helped the UFC just giving Andrei Arlovsky, Anthony Johnson. Take them, guys. Look at those guys now. So,
well, 2 more things about the NAC. They announced at the end of the hearing that Francisco Aguilar, who had been the chairman of the NAC, was stepping down, and Anthony Marnell, who has rose to prominence via the airing of these hearings, will be the new chairman effective immediately. I'm very curious about this because this is a younger guy. This is a guy who seems to have some very strong opinions about things. So we'll see which direction.
What was that word you were searching for earlier?
Yes, very well put. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here. And B, Nick Diaz put out this week on social media that his new attorneys in Nevada, who also happen to be the UFC's attorneys, which I think indicates that the UFC is helping out Nick Diaz, much to people's surprise perhaps. His new attorneys are actually in talks with the NAC, so we'll see what happens there. His team doesn't want to talk about it. I've reached out to them, but I'm wondering, there have been some bold predictions thrown out. Do you think around this time next year, or by the end of 2016, Nick Diaz will have competed inside the UFC octagon?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
What a turnaround that would be.
I mean, I think that the NAC saw all the reaction and it doesn't want to back down, but I think that there's room for that. I don't know whether I was going to say for them to save face. I don't think it's possible for them to save clown face or whatever you want to call it. But there's no way to. But I think in their mind they can save face by negotiating something and making Diaz accept some kind of a punishment. I don't think that he should have been punished at all. But if he's willing to bend a little bit, I have a feeling they'll bend a lot.
What do you think? UFC 200. Wow. Here he comes,
Can you imagine that?
After his fresh off his victory over the NAC, here comes Nick Diaz. No, I don't know.
Back in Nevada.
Yeah, back in Nevada. I don't know if that'll happen, but I do anticipate. You get the sense that it's going pretty well for him right now. Yeah. Like it seemed like he's pretty confident. I have no idea in terms of how those things work, to be completely honest. But if my gut feeling is that they would like to fix it. They want to fix the wrong, so I would say yes, he fights in 2016.
I got to tell you, many stars are aligning for UFC 200 if certain things could play the right way. I mean, that Ronda Cyborg, perhaps the debut of CM Punk. I mean, there are some big fights out there that could happen for that show. George St. Pierre, who knows? You know, things could actually be very interesting.
We'll see if you get on there.
Nick Lentz, that would be
that.
huge. Matt Brown. All right, well, that does it for our NAC portion, sponsored portion of the show. Let's move along to Vitor Belfort. And this one is a bit of a tricky one for me because, contrary to popular belief, I don't want to be the story, and I feel a little weird talking about something that happened sort of on my show, but never really happened. What happened, if anyone missed it, was that Vitor Belfort was supposed to be on the MMA Hour, and I had booked him via his wife, Joanna, who had always been very pleasant to deal with.
Wife / manager,
representative,
right?
I don't know if she has that official title, but she is repping him, especially now that he's not doing stuff with the Black Zillions and Glenn Robinson in particular. So I booked him on the Wednesday before the show. Agreed, no questions asked. Sunday, I check in just to remind them, no response. I check in Monday at 11 a.m. and just say, hey, we're going to call you at 2:05 p.m. Eastern time for this interview. I get a text back, as I've outlined on the show, asking me that, we only want to talk about the Henderson fight and no questions about the Josh Gross story that came out recently or any other TRT-related stuff. Essentially, after a long back and forth, I said I couldn't go by those rules. I felt uncomfortable. I don't write my questions in advance. I don't know which direction, but I was going to ask about this because this is his first interview since all that came out. She said he's not coming on the show, in so many words. And so what I want to ask you guys is, this is a show called the MMA Beat, and we talk about the MMA Beat on this show. How do you feel about this? This became a bigger story than had he come on, talked about it for a couple minutes, no comment here, spun it this way, that way. It became a bigger deal, and now I'm curious to see what happens next week when he's fighting in Brazil. Did they handle this the right way? Should I not be, as upset as I was on Monday? What's your take as a veteran journalist on the beat?
I would say that this is not about Vitor Belfort. I mean, this is not. I mean, perhaps behind the scenes he's orchestrating things, but to me, it's unprofessional management or unprofessional representation, whatever it is that his wife would classify herself as. It's reasonable for somebody to not want to talk about the TRT stuff and all that. It's reasonable. So when you contact those folks the Wednesday before, it's reasonable for them to say, we'd love to come on your show, but we only want to talk about this Dan Henderson fight. We don't want to talk about other stuff. And then it's your decision to say either, okay, and then you let the viewers know beforehand, well, he did not want to talk about that, so we're just going to talk. Or you say, no, I want all no holds barred, and I just want to do that, so sorry, we're not going to do it. That's reasonable. There's nothing wrong with them trying to set some kind of ground rules. That's okay, but to do it an hour or two before an interview is unprofessional. And frankly, this was somebody else. Maybe it's a different story. But Vitor Belfort, if you take away the TRT from a discussion with Vitor Belfort, what are you left with? Really,
that's what I was going to say. Is It would have been glaring if he'd come on your show and you did not ask. You know who would have took the brunt of the heat on that? Is you. Because why weren't you asking him? So you can't compromise what the line of questioning is. You're representing your listeners. They want what they want to know, correct? I mean, it's like you can't really put those parameters down and say, like, well, we're only going to discuss the fight. I mean, if you do, you did the right thing by saying no thanks, I'm guessing you would have told them no thanks if they had told you in time. I mean, it was the way it went down. Yeah.
We're happy to do this interview on Wednesday, but I don't want to talk about this, that, and the other. I would have said, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. That happens all the time. In fact, I won't say with who. It just happened to me an hour ago. This happens every week with every interview. That's a negotiation that happens. But you can't agree, like you said, and then, in my opinion, 2 hours before the interview say, oh, and by the way, we're not talking about this, that, and the other.
It's funny. In the fight game, I haven't come across that too much. I really couldn't come up with an example when I was thinking of that. I know that there's always sensitive topics. And a lot of times as a writer, you're more angle-driven. Anyway, you're trying for something specific. Your show is more of a general. You're going to ask general questions about the fight, about what's going on with their lives, etc. They sort of know that. They could use that to their advantage. That's why I think your show is pretty popular, too, because fighters can want to explain themselves, or they can get something off their chest immediately and be like, I'm done with it, and I'm not answering questions about that. They could actually use the platform to say that this is the last time you'll hear from me on this topic. Those types of things. as a writer, I don't really hear that too much, but I remember back in the day when I was writing about, I wrote about music, and you would sometimes, because they would have controversies within the drugs or whatever, and bands, something going on, they would ask you to do that. But because you were so specifically angling for something else or whatever it might be, maybe it didn't matter to you because you were going in, a very specific thing. But I really haven't heard of that, and I mean, I can understand why Vitor doesn't want to talk about it, but I find it kind of crazy to put down those kind of rules.
I think it's a balancing act, actually. I think that last night on UFC Tonight, Ronda Rousey was on, and at the end of this interview, they did Kenny Florian came on and said that she did not want to talk. She came on saying that she did not want to speak about her personal life. So she didn't want to talk, obviously, about the thing with her mother criticizing her manager, and probably not about her coach. I mean, and the thing about her her dating life with Travis Brown. Totally reasonable, but that gives the producers over at that show had to make a decision. Well, these are things that are out there. But here's the biggest star in the sport, and are we going to agree to not talk about that stuff? Well, she's the biggest star in the sport, so they made a decision. They'll keep that stuff to the side, and they'll bring her on. Vitor Belfort is not the biggest star in the sport. Vitor Belfort is at the tail end of his career. Why would you want to bring him on just to talk about his fight when all this other stuff that is much more relevant than Ronda's social life or even her mother? This is very relevant. His whole TRT background is very relevant to his fight career, and he's a guy who's at the tail end of his career. So it's a balancing act. I mean, if he was fighting for the title, maybe you might have made a different decision. Well, this is the guy who's challenging for the belt next week, and I'm gonna have him on even with those ground rules, and then you let your viewers know about that in advance. That's fine, but it's a balancing act, and I think that people who are trying to set up interviews on either end, if you're the PR person for a fighter or you're the person who's producing a show, you have to play that balancing act, and they just played it badly.
I just think that now he's sets himself up, obviously, because this has gotten out there that he was putting down these sort of. Well, now he has a fight coming up, and he's going to have to deal with press in that event. It'd be interesting to see sort of now.
One wonders. I mean, he's in Brazil, and I actually think there are a lot of great journalists, including our own Guilherme Cruz over there. So one wonders how he's going to handle the situation. I understand that he was ready to talk about this or willing to talk about it in to some degree. That's why I was kind of surprised by the way his wife handled it. I'm not crazy enough to think that this is going to be like a major part of the Vitor Belfort story when it's all said and done. But to me, this is another example of just kind of getting it wrong, because you could have talked about this on this show, and as I assured her, I'm not looking to embarrass him or make it worse or anything. I just feel like there are certain questions that need to be asked. He could have addressed it in any way he wanted to. He could have even said no comment. And then next week, when it's media day in Brazil, say, look, I talked about it. I was asked about it. Go back and look at the tape. She thought that, if it's a press conference or something like that, it's okay because it's sort of an open forum. But in an interview, it doesn't make any sense because he's giving me the time. As you just said, that's backwards thinking. Yeah. You go on an outlet. Typically, you go on an outlet where you can trust the interviewer and you don't think it's going to get off, on the wrong foot or go off the rails. And then you can move on and say, look back, I addressed it. This to me is like, I can't even wrap my head around it. So now he's involved in all this, and it just adds this other weird layer to this fight. It's unfortunate.
Another weird layer for a guy who at this point, I know we talked about this before, in a fight, a main event of a fight that's sort of like a weird one. It's a weird fight to even...
Henderson's background, Brazil.
Right, all of it. And so it's just the whole thing. There's a point when the Vitor Belfort stuff, he becomes too complicated. It becomes one of those things you're just like, how much do you want Vitor Belfort in the news anymore at all? Because if there's just a point where it's just too much, like it's just...
Is he worth it at this point?
I don't know. I would, from the UFC standpoint, particularly, especially with Josh Gross's piece coming out and all these things, like from the UFC standpoint, I would almost be like, well, if he loses and he's no longer... I mean, I don't know. In my mind, I'd be like, well, I would be a little sick of the Vitor Belfort drama at this point.
And again, as we talked about on this show, remember when the UFC took a very long time to comment on this? They had the perfect out. This was an old era. We didn't know a lot about TRT. Now look what we're doing. We're partnered with USADA. He could say the same. This was an old era. It wasn't outlawed. The commission, they said it was... You have a perfect out. So by saying, I don't want to talk about this and that, sounds like you're guilty. It sounds like you have nothing to say for your actions.
Say what you will about the UFC, but except when Dana White just sort of blows his top and starts spouting nonsense without any preparation, generally speaking, they hold back, and when the time comes to make a comment, they make a comment, and they are pretty good at diffusing these kinds of things. Not always to the satisfaction of everybody in the media or even fans, but they get their comment out there when they have to get their comment out there, and then you just got to deal with it. Whereas in this situation, something that would have been a 15-minute conversation with you in which you probably would have asked him a couple questions about this, and he could have said,
and his political backings, he would have asked that
yeah,
question.
that's right. He could have talked about his ambition to be vice president of the United States and all that. But instead, this is what we're talking about.
Sure.
And I did mention earlier that he's fighting Dan Henderson. I think we all mentioned the name Dan Henderson, but mostly that's been obscured, and this is the big thing.
Yeah, and as I said on this show, a few years later, I think it's 3 years later now, I don't feel like this story is the biggest deal because of this new era that we're in.
Right.
So, as I said to her, I wasn't going to poke her. I just want to know what, if anything, you have to say. Really, that was it. It was almost like an open-ended question. And to just run away and wash your hands of the whole thing, to me, seems like a mistake. We'll see what happens next week. That's another interesting subplot going into that main event over in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Let's talk about Paige VanZant. She's returning to the cage on December 10th in what's shaping up to be one of the more fascinating weeks in UFC history. 3 straight events. She was supposed to fight Joanne Calderwood. Calderwood pulled out due to a knee injury, and now she's fighting Rose Namajunas, who around a year ago, almost a year to the date, fought for the belt, lost against Carla Esparza, the finale of The Ultimate Fighter. The UFC, Paige, they've been criticized for, going on the slow track, giving her relatively easy opponents, although I don't know if that's 100% fair, but people have been wanting to see her get pushed. Are you guys surprised that she's getting Rose next after what she did back in September?
Yes. I mean, when that rumor was started up, or whoever first came out with it,
Justin Buchholz.
That's right. That's right. You're right. I sort of was like, I don't foresee that happening, just because Rose was the when she was coming up on Tough 20, it was like we were talking about Rose, the next Ronda Rousey. Remember, it was like she was kind of this the star that was going to be coming out of the show. Well, it's an interesting dynamic because here, all of a sudden, a year later or whatever it is, it's Paige who's taken that space. She's the one who's taken that space, and she's sort of the darling of the division, and she's doing all these things. So I still felt like they're both very young. Rose is a tougher match, I think. So it's like there were a lot of sort of sideline things of the reason I wouldn't think they'd put that together. But yeah, I'm surprised because Calderwood to me was the perfect sort of opponent. You had somebody that was tough, but beatable. Like we've seen her lose some fights, but she's a very tough fighter who could beat her. Could beat Paige. So to me, Rose is a wild card. She's just, I think she, I remember her on the show and just some of her fights. Like she gets very worked up in these types of situations. I wouldn't be surprised if she puts on her best performance that night.
And she looked fantastic just a couple of weeks ago.
It's just an interesting dynamic, though. It's a really compelling fight. It's a better fight in my mind, but I'm a little surprised because that is not a slow track fight. That's hey, here you go. She fought for the belt, like you said, and it's like, here you go. Now we'll see how you do here.
Yeah, I was thinking this was a fight we were going to see, but not now. I was thinking this was somewhere down the road. Watching those two fighters and how they've both been advancing in their own way. I mean, I know that Rose fought for the belt, but it was part of a reality show, and it was a new, a whole new division. I still feel like she's a kind of a developing fighter, even though she is a title contender, title challenger, I should say, or not even challenger, a title contender, I suppose is the right word. And then Paige, of course, has been building up. I mean, the charges that she's been coddled, or that I think it's a little bit. I don't think that's accurate. I think that she's being built up the way that young fighters should be built up.
Absolutely.
You give them a little bit tougher competition every time. You don't throw them in there. And I don't know that throwing her in with Rose is throwing her in the deep end, but it's throwing her a lot more closer to the deep end than she's been. And I feel like it's a little too soon for this fight, but I'm still excited to see it.
Right. I will say that weekend though just has that vibe in general. Like you see a matchup like that. Wow, that's crazy. It's a fun fight for us. It's maybe too soon, but it's a really compelling fight. But then you look at that weekend. I feel like they're all constructed that way. They're not protecting anybody. It seems like everybody's being made vulnerable that weekend. It's a pretty amazing. If you go down all the fights, there's so many of them. Like Nurmagomedov's fight. I mean,
Ferguson.
yes. I mean, they're just every single one of them has that sort of element. Like, whoa. I mean, somebody has to lose this fight, and it's that you wouldn't think that they'd want one of those guys to lose. You're gonna have like 10 people come off that weekend losing fights that you'd think that they'd want all of them to continue momentum. So it's par for the course.
There's not a big gap between Rose and the belt at this point in that division, which is kind of all up in the air. And by the way, for the record, I'm not criticizing the UFC or Sean Shelby, who's the matchmaker for that division. I think it's fantastic because I think in MMA, and in particular in the UFC, losses don't mean as much as they do in boxing. Like if Conor loses to Jose Aldo a couple days later, people are like, oh, there goes the hype train. He'll bounce back, he'll win another fight, and we'll be right back at it. Just look at Chael Sonnen, and look at BJ Penn, and look at Randy
Time
Couture.
has proven that. Like,
exactly.
I think there was a notion maybe 2007 or 2008, the boom period when people really get into it, that losses meant so much. Time has proven that they don't. Like, you can get over a loss in the sport, and I think that's one of the unique things about it. You can rebound, you can come back. We've seen a lot of guys in the heavyweight division, especially, like, who've made careers long after having big losing streaks and things like that. So,
well, I think it really depends more how you look in the fight. What do you look like you belong? If we were looking at this as a step up for Paige VanZant. If she goes in there and just gets dominated by Rose Namajunas, then we're going to say, well, I guess she just wasn't ready for this step, and so the build will be slower. If she goes in there and they fight a 3-round split decision and she loses, that's a win in the sort of the court of public opinion. And I think that, but as Chuck says, this is going to happen for a lot of fighters. Just think about that Sunday. We're going to be looking at a list of losers. On that list, we might have Conor McGregor. We're going to have either Conor McGregor or Jose Aldo.
We talked about this one time on the show. Right? It's going to be amazing. And I feel like that's what's crazy about that weekend is just people have to lose. I mean, you're talking about Rockhold and Weidman. I mean, like all that stuff. You're like, one of these guys is going to be a loser that weekend. It's just crazy.
Rockhold. I was going to say Weidman, Rockhold, Jacare, and Romero, Frankie Edgar Mendez.
I mean, it's the list of losers. The Sunday lineup. If you put a list together of all the people who lost in the previous 3 days. That's going to be an amazing list. That's going to be a list of some of the. It's almost like it's like almost like a pound for pound list. If you take, it's quite a list. So it's going to be fun.
Crazy.
I feel like it's a win-win for the UFC. Both very exciting fighters, marketable fighters. The winner, moves on, has some hype behind her, and the loser will rebound very quickly, especially in this division. I think that 115, correct me if I'm wrong, is infinitely more interesting these days than 135 for the women, right? Yeah. I mean, with 100%. Joanna doing her thing and she's fighting, but Claudia Gadelha is coming up, and you're expecting her to get the next fight. These two women now, Calderwood is still very interesting, and they continue to develop more and more talent out of there. I don't know what it is about that weight class vis-a-vis, or maybe it's just because Ronda just seems so dominant and has rolled through everyone. But to me, 115 seems a lot fresher and more interesting these days.
I totally agree. It's a much more competitive division. Having said that, when Ronda and Joanna are competing on the same card, Joanna is the bigger favorite. So and I think that the Rousey versus Holly Holm fight is a more interesting fight. I don't think that Holly Holm has enough to take the fight, but at least it's going to force Ronda Rousey to show something a little different and somehow have the striking.
But that says more about Holm and Latorno, right?
That one, well, exactly. It does. It says about that one matchup is pretty good, but Rousey is so dominant. Joanna is great, and we've seen some really great performances by her, but there's always somebody in there who can give her a fight.
So Paige has been moved from the slow track to the fast track. A guy named Michael Venom Page continues to be on the slow track for Bellator. He just fought this past week. Friday, he fought once again. He won. He's now 9-0. He's 4-0 in the Bellator cage, and he's a very interesting fighter. He's a very flashy fighter. He's a very cocky fighter. He's an entertaining fighter. 3 out of those 4 wins, quick finishes. His lone decision was against Nishan Burrell, and coincidentally, he's the only real name fighter that he's fought in the Bellator cage.
He's the only one who wrestled with him, too.
That's true. So how do you guys feel about MVP? Because I find him to be one of the more fascinating guys on the Bellator roster. Are you okay with Bellator putting him in there against these no-namers, given their position? They are not the UFC. They can play by different rules, in my opinion. You have these fun fights. You know what you're getting with him. He's incredibly entertaining, and he's different. All these moves, I mean, it's a lot of hot dogging, but there's something to it. It's hard to look away. or do you feel like, all right, we've seen it for 4 fights, now it's time to put up or shut up? You know, you can only get away with that for so long. How do you guys feel? Where do you fall on that one?
We're talking about him.
Yeah.
And we're talking about him because of the way he's been fighting and because of who he's been fighting. And I feel like, you know, I was at his show, not this last one, but the one against Rudy Beers, and he was, you know, a very fast fight, but there was like a little bit of a mystique around him because you're like, well, let's watch this guy. This will be phenomenal, that sort of vibe. And it is fun, but it's more of like a novelty or a showcase until we see him go up against somebody else, you know. And I know there was a couple guys backstage whispering that night, like got some of the competitors like, I would love to be the guy to fight him next because they want to be the guy that shuts that whole thing down. But then you look at what Bellator's sort of doing with some of their tentpole stuff and like how they're sort of competing with UFC, and some of it is just keeping guys in showcase fights, giving guys, you know what I'm saying? And he would be one of those guys that I would think would be remaining on that slow track for guys who accommodate his style for as long as they can. But at some point, I think if anybody's ever going to really take him seriously, obviously they're going to have to match him up against somebody who people think can beat him. You know what I mean? I
You
think
just spoke to Brendan Ward, right?
Brendan Ward, and that was the guy. That was the guy whispering backstage. I think that's the kind of guy who would love to fight him. You know,
But that's an acceptable next step, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying have him fight for the belt.
And Brendan Ward would accommodate him in a stand-up
Sure.
fight. You know, so
I
I
think
feel
it'll
like
be
that would be a fun fight.
Yeah, but you set this up in a good way because but just by setting apart what Bellator does versus what the UFC does. I mean, it's not about building. You know, it's not about Paige VanZant moving up with a little bit tougher fights every time, trying to get up into contention, and ultimately, if she keeps succeeding, getting a title fight. This is not what Bellator is doing. Bellator is trying to draw eyeballs, and if you put on a spectacle, you're going to draw eyeballs. And so I understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you know, your hypothetical is, well, how long can they keep doing that before they put him in with somebody? They're not main eventing him all the time. They're just making him an added attraction kind of thing. And I think they can continue doing it for a while until someone keeps calling him out. I would like to see him fight somebody better because for me the sport is about competition. Sure. It's not about the spectacle. I mean, that's not really what it's about.
And it's funny too because right now he's still not a name where he's going to be able to. And I don't know if he could get there. He could fight 10 times against these types of people he's fighting. I just don't know if he'll ever gain the steam to actually. I mean, his style, he could knock guys out and stuff. But I mean, will he ever become like a star that way too? I mean, I feel like he's just going to remain where he's at, sort of an intrigue. But he'll sort of stay there.
He's a very charismatic guy. I feel like they're holding him back a little bit for whatever reason. I mean, they need to push him and look at the ratings. The ratings weren't all that great. To me, if you're asking me, do I want to see the Michael Venom Page show or do I want to see Brandon Halsey versus Rafael Carvalho? I mean, I'm going with MVP. He's a fresher guy and he's a prospect, and you know you never know what you're really going to get from him. So I feel like they need to push him and stop. Again, like we were saying, losses don't mean as much. If he gets exposed, then he'll come back. Right. But him versus these no names, in my opinion, has gotten a bit stale.
Especially with a flashy fighter. I mean, remember when Conor McGregor first arrived on the UFC scene, even before that, when he was fighting, and we were just hearing, you know, getting these little tapes from Ireland where he was doing all these flashy kicks and spinning stuff, and it was like, oh well, yeah, let's see if we could do that against the top fighters in the world. And when he first was in the UFC, he was competing against the lower level guys. He was still looking great. But there was always that question: is he going to be able to handle the tougher guys? And then he moved up gradually, and he did. I think there's this question with this guy. We want to see whether all his flashy moves work. I mean, is he like, what's that commercial? I don't even know that commercial. Is that crazy commercial where some guy's doing all kinds of spinning stuff, and his opponent's just sort of standing there waiting, and then the bell rings, the guy does all the spins, and then the other guy comes all across and just knocks him out. Is this going to happen when he competes against somebody better? So that's part of it. The other part of it that I got to add in is, you know, I know he's a flashy guy and he's emotional and he wants to put on a show, but his nonsense after he's finished an opponent, I just don't get that. I mean, I'm a guy who likes to see competitors, and I'm not a big fan of trash talking, but I understand the purpose of trash talking. I understand that when Conor McGregor talks about Jose Aldo, it generates more business for him and for the UFC and ultimately for Aldo even. And I can accept when people want to say stuff before the fight. But when the fight ends and the guy you've just defeated is lying on the mat and you start gloating on it, I don't like that.
What do you think? Is it getting a little tired?
I mean, I don't know. I know what you're saying 100%. I think he can be a little bit over the top. And I mean, anybody who does that over a period of time starts to take on a certain, I don't know. But ultimately, right now, I feel like he's in that spot for me. I'm still kind of feeling it all out because honestly, I like to watch him fight. It is fun. I remember before he even started fighting in Bellator, people were sending me videos and stuff, and I was like, well, who is this guy? I mean, he's doing this
so
crazy
ridiculous
stuff.
That you just couldn't help but watch.
So there's still this real element of that. Like we're still waiting to discover him, you know. So it's fun to be in there. But I agree. I mean, you would like him to dial that stuff back. I mean, he doesn't need to do that. It's not going to help him. That sort of thing is not going to help him. So
I feel like Bellator, for an organization that has a lot of sort of faceless names, this is good for them.
Yeah.
Here we are talking about it. We're not really talking about anything else on that card on Friday. They have a show coming up next week. We're not talking about that. Maybe we will next week before it. But he is good for Bellator. There's no doubt about it. I would just like to see, I don't want to see these guys making their debut against him all the time. You know what I mean? It reminds me of Saturday morning wrestling. I used to watch Maple Leaf Wrestling back home, and it would be Earthquake versus Joe Blow from nearby Worcester, Massachusetts. I need to see a name that I recognize. The time is now, as the UFC said. But I was curious to get your take on the hot dogging, because I know you're a grizzled veteran.
But there's a time and place. I mean, one of the most iconic boxing images ever is Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. That's gloating in a sense, but it was just him standing there motionless after pulling what that time was an upset, and just over some guy that it was. There's something there's something different. But this stuff that you haven't done anything yet.
Who was the guy he beat? Who did Paige just beat? What was his name?
I have no idea. And there's it's what this reminds me more of. It's like, and I'm a big football fan, and sometimes you'll see a team. They're down 27-0, and one of their guys gets a sack or something. He gets up and starts dancing, and I'm like, what did you do? You just got a sack. Your team's down 27 points. Don't do this. I mean, I don't think that Venom has accomplished enough for this to be taken seriously. Go out there and beat somebody tough. Go out there and beat somebody. I mean, I don't want to say that the guys he beat aren't tough, because anybody that gets in a cage is a tough guy. But to beat a guy who is on your level, or is presumed to be on your level, don't go out there and be on this level and beat somebody down here and then gloat over it.
Yeah, and I'm surprised there aren't more Bellator fighters calling him out. This is your ticket. This is the guy that you want to fight. Yeah. Especially if they're, call the guy out. This will get you some recognition. You don't hear much of that.
It's such a mystery of the Bellator ranks. Just what goes, like all the things that we sort of expect at the UFC are so different in Bellator. I don't get it either. Because if you're one of the guys who wants recognition, why aren't you calling him out?
It's the perfect guy.
It doesn't make
especially
sense.
If you're a wrestler, right?
Yeah.
One quick one before we go. On Friday, the UFC reinstated Jon Jones. We all expected this was going to happen. That same day, at a Q&A in Ireland, Rory McDonald, in some people's eyes, slipped up and said that George St. Pierre was going to come back for super fights and not for the belt. So this is my question to you guys. Who fights first, Jon Jones or George St. Pierre?
I would say Jon Jones fights first. I don't know that GSP is ever going to fight again. I don't know. I listened to that interview. Rory said he's interested in super fights, but he didn't say that he's coming back. In fact, seconds after he said the one thing, he said, I have no idea if he's coming back, but I know if he does, he's going to come back for super fights. He's not coming back looking to get back on the title track, and that makes total sense. And while I know that we talked about this before, that we would all, I think, like to see George stay retired. He walked away at the perfect time. If he does come back, and they put him in there with an Anderson Silva, that's fine. But don't come. But really? I don't think he's.
You really want to see that?
I don't. But I'm just saying, if he has the desire to do it, and that's the thing that I would be more, more accepting. And I also think that's where the UFC is would make the most money, is to put him in there with some other, senior circuit star. But Jon Jones is not on the senior circuit. Jon Jones is ready to come back, and we know who he's going to fight, and I can't wait to see it happen.
I think it's going to be GSP, man. I think he's. I was listening to Faraz Sahabi on your show, and there was something. I remember you asked him about another previous appearance, and it just sounded. You could hear it in his voice. He was like, "Nah, I don't know anything about it. I don't even want to. Who knows, And then this time, though, he was like, you could tell that he knew something about his guy, and he wants back in there. I think, and we were talking about like December. He was sort of throwing out these, which was it's too soon.
Yeah.
But I could see him coming back. I could see him in the first quarter of 2016 fighting. Wow. I really could. I mean, I don't know if it'll be a super fight or if he'll get back in the ranks, depending maybe on how Rory's stuff go. I don't know. But to me, it's like I think he wants to be back there. Bringing, I mean, like even having guys like Sage come in and stuff. I mean, that probably looks at that stuff. I feel like he's getting refreshed. There was like a part of him I think that just the game wasn't fun anymore, and it wasn't just he was getting beat up like he was with, because that's why we wanted to see him one way. It was like the game wasn't fun. There's too much anxiety placed on stuff. I feel like he's renewed somewhat. So
Man, you always bring the surprises every single time.
So GSP, look for him.
And this idea that, again, I don't want to see him fight. I won't boycott it, obviously. I mean, he's a huge star. Even watching highlights of him, it's like, wow, this feels like so long ago that we were even talking about a GSP fight. But why shouldn't he fight for the belt, right? I mean, I don't think that he's lost a step. He didn't do anything to not earn that right. He was the champion when he walked away. So why have him fight these, these fading stars or anything?
Montreal again.
Gosh, they would sell out the Olympic Stadium in a second. Him versus a broomstick. But him versus Robbie Lawler, I mean, why not?
Yeah.
If you're going to bring him back, let's see if he can fight for the belt. If not, then he goes and fights,
I'm so torn on it ultimately
Yeah.
because, like we talked about many times, there aren't that many graceful ways out of the fight game. He has the graceful out right now. If he comes back, I feel like it's only bad things, but I still think he will come back now.
All right.
Wow.
Halloween in 2 days. What are you dressing up as?
GSP.
That's true. Everyone will wonder.
And I'm going to be the broomstick. So
Yeah.
that should
Wow,
be-
this is
be
great.
good. Yeah, this
We
should
just
be fun.
settled it.
That should be fun.
You guys
So-
going out? I was thinking you wear the hat, he wears the shirt.
Yeah.
You guys go as a tandem. Wonderful. I was hoping you'd surprise me with that today, but I guess
Next time.
wishful thinking.
Yeah.
We should've
Happy
came in
Halloween.
costume.
You too.
And happy Halloween to all of you as well. It is a relatively quiet weekend in the world of mixed martial arts coming up, but it picks back up next weekend. Bellator has a show in St. Louis, and of course the Vitor Belfort versus Dan Henderson fight, and then things really start to pick up with UFC 193, etc., etc. But for now, we have run out of time. We appreciate you checking out this special primetime edition, if you want to call it 5 p.m. Eastern primetime. That's exciting. Of the MMA Beat. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week.